You're sitting alone on a Friday night. Your phone is face down on the table, silent, not because no one's texting, but because you stopped checking months ago. There are unread messages, group chats you've muted, invitations you've ignored, calls you've let go to voicemail. And the strangest part, you don't feel guilty anymore. You used to. You used to craft elaborate excuses, apologize for your absence, promise to do better next time. But now you just don't respond. And the silence that used to feel heavy, that used to feel like failure, now feels like peace. This is the psychology of people who cut everyone off. And if you know, you know. Not from watching it happen to someone else, but from being the one who did it, the one who walked away, the one who stopped showing up, the one people whisper about. What happened to them? They changed. They're different now. But here's what they don't understand. You didn't change. You just stopped pretending. Let's go back to before. Before you cut everyone off, you were the good friend, the reliable one, the one people called when they needed something. You showed up every time. You drove 3 hours to comfort a friend going through a breakup. You stayed up until 4 a.m. talking someone off a ledge. You remembered birthdays. You checked in. You asked how people were doing and actually listened to the answer. You were present, invested, all in. And you thought that's what friendship was. That's what love looked like. Showing up, being there, giving everything you had. But then something happened. You needed someone. Not for something small, not for a favor or a ride or someone to grab coffee with. You needed help, real help. Maybe you were going through a breakup. Maybe you lost someone. Maybe you were drowning in depression or anxiety or grief. Maybe you were just tired, so tired you couldn't hold it together anymore. So you reached out, and you waited, and waited, and the people who you showed up for 100 times, they were suddenly busy, suddenly dealing with their own stuff, suddenly not good at this kind of thing. You got a few, "I'm sorry you're going through this" texts, a couple thinking of you messages that felt more like obligation than care. But nobody showed up, nobody called, nobody came over, nobody sat with you in your pain, the way you'd sat with them in theirs. And in that moment, everything shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet realization that settled into your bones. I've been alone this whole time. I just didn't know it. Here's what happens psychologically when you realize you've been giving to people who were never going to give back. You don't get angry right away. First, you get confused. You replay every interaction, every time you showed up, every sacrifice you made, and you wonder, did I imagine the closeness? Was I the only one who thought we were actually friends? Then you get sad, because you realize the answer is yes. You were more invested, you cared more, you tried harder, and they let you. They took everything you gave and never once thought to reciprocate. Not because they're evil, but because you made it easy. You never asked for anything. You never needed anything. You were just there. And people get comfortable with that. They start to see you as the person who gives, not the person who also needs. So when you finally do need something, it doesn't even occur to them to show up, because that's not the role you play. Then comes the anger, not the hot explosive kind, the cold kind, the kind that calculates. You start seeing patterns you missed before, the friend who only texts when they need something. You see how every conversation starts with their problem, their crisis, their drama. And when you try to share yours, they change the subject, or they respond with surface-level platitudes, or they just don't respond at all. The person who's always available when things are fun, parties, trips, good times. But when life gets hard, when you're struggling, suddenly they're overwhelmed, can't handle heavy stuff right now, need to protect their energy. The family member who expects you at every holiday, every gathering, every obligation. But when you need help, when you need support, they're too busy, too stressed, too whatever. You see it all now, the one-sidedness, the imbalance, the way you've been carrying relationships that were never designed to carry you back, and you can't unsee it. So you start pulling back. Not dramatically, not with a big announcement, just quietly. You stop texting first, you stop making plans, you stop being the one who reaches out. And here's what you discover, most people don't notice. The conversations just stop. because they were never reaching out. You were. The plans dry up because you were always the one initiating. The friendship fades because you were the only one maintaining it. And that confirms everything. You weren't important to them. You were convenient. Let's talk about what this does to your nervous system. Your brain has been collecting data every time you reached out and got nothing back. Every time you showed up and no one showed up for you. Every time you were vulnerable and people looked away. Your nervous system learned a lesson. Connection is dangerous because connection means hoping, and hoping means being disappointed. Connection means trusting, and trusting means being let down. Connection means needing, and needing means being abandoned. So your brain, in its infinite wisdom, decides to protect you. It stops producing the chemicals that make connection feel good. It starts producing the chemicals that make isolation feel safe. You develop what psychologists call attachment avoidance. Not because you don't want connection, but because your brain has learned that connection hurts more than loneliness. So it chooses loneliness, because loneliness is predictable, manageable, safe. Here's what people say when they notice you've pulled away. You've changed. Yes, you have. You stopped accepting crumbs and pretending they're a meal. You're so cold now. No, you're just done being warm to people who never appreciated the heat. What happened to you? Life, people, the accumulation of 1,000 small abandonments that taught you that you're on your own. You need to let people in. You did, and they left. So now the door is closed. They say these things like they're concerned, like they care. But if they cared, they would have shown up. They would have noticed you were struggling before you had to disappear. They didn't, so their concern now feels hollow. Let's talk about the guilt. Because even though you know you made the right choice, even though cutting people off was self-preservation, there's still guilt. Guilt for not being the person you used to be. The accommodating one, the available one, the one who never said no. Guilt for the relationships that ended, even the toxic ones, even the ones that were slowly killing you. Guilt for choosing yourself, because you've spent so long putting everyone else first that prioritizing your own peace feels selfish. But here's what you're learning. Guilt is not the same as wrong. You can feel guilty and still be making the right choice. You can feel bad about hurting people and still know that staying would have hurt you more. You can mourn the loss of relationships and still acknowledge that they were already dead. You were just the only one trying to resuscitate them. Here's what isolation gives you that connection never did. Peace. Real, deep, sustainable peace. You're not constantly managing other people's emotions. You're not walking on eggshells. You're not wondering if you said the wrong thing, or if someone's mad at you, or if you're doing enough. You're not performing. You're not pretending. You're not contorting yourself into shapes that make you acceptable. You're just existing. And for the first time in your life, that's enough. You also get clarity. Without the noise of everyone else's opinions, expectations, and judgments, you can finally hear yourself think. You start to figure out who you actually are, not who people want you to be, not who you think you should be, just who you are. And that's terrifying, because you've spent so long being who other people needed that you forgot you're allowed to just be yourself. Let's talk about what you miss. You don't miss the people, not really. You miss the idea of them, the version of friendship you thought you had, the connection you believed existed. You miss the hope, the belief that if you just tried hard enough, cared enough, gave enough, people would show up for you. You miss the version of yourself who still believed that love was reciprocal. That effort was matched, that showing up meant people would show up back. But you don't miss the actual relationships, the one-sided conversations, the disappointments, the feeling of giving everything and getting nothing. You don't miss being taken for granted, so you don't go back. Here's where it gets complicated. Because cutting everyone off isn't a permanent solution. It's a pause, a reset, a necessary isolation to heal from the wounds that connection created. But humans are wired for connection. We're not meant to be alone forever. The question is, How do you open yourself up again without repeating the same patterns? How do you trust again when trust has only ever led to disappointment? How do you let people in when everyone you've let in has eventually walked out? And the answer is slowly, carefully, with boundaries you didn't have before. Here's what you've learned from cutting everyone off. You've learned that you're the only person who's guaranteed to show up for you. So you better learn to show up for yourself. You've learned that reciprocity is non-negotiable. If someone's not matching your energy, they don't get access to it. You've learned that your presence is a gift, not a given, and people who don't treat it as such don't deserve it. You've learned that being alone is better than being lonely in a crowd, that isolation is better than fake connection, that silence is better than shallow conversation. You've learned that you don't owe anyone your energy, your time, your emotional labor. You've learned that no is a complete sentence, that you don't have to explain yourself, that you don't have to justify choosing yourself. You've learned that the people who matter will understand, and the people who don't understand don't matter. Let's talk about the judgment. People will judge you for cutting everyone off. They'll say you're running, hiding, giving up. Let them. Because they weren't there when you were drowning. They weren't there when you needed help. They weren't there when you were breaking. They don't get to have an opinion on how you saved yourself. You're not running. You're standing still for the first time in your life. No longer chasing people who don't want to be caught. No longer begging for attention from people who never intended to give it. You're not hiding. You're protecting. There's a difference. Hiding is shame-based. Protecting is boundary-based. You're not ashamed of who you are. You're just refusing to give access to people who've proven they can't be trusted with it. And you're not giving up on people. You're giving up on the version of connection that requires you to lose yourself in order to keep others. Here's what happens in the quiet. You start to hear yourself again. The voice you've been ignoring for years. The one that's been screaming that you deserve better, that you're worth more, that you don't have to settle for relationships that drain you. You start to feel again, not the numbness you wore like armor, but real feelings, grief for what you lost, anger at what was taken, relief that you finally walked away. You start to heal, not because time heals all wounds, but because you're finally giving yourself the space to process what happened instead of pretending it didn't. You start to rebuild, not the same structure, not the same foundation, but something new, something stronger, something that can hold your weight instead of everyone else's. Let's talk about what comes next. Maybe you'll let people in again. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll find a few people who prove that not everyone leaves, that not everyone takes, that connection can be mutual. Maybe you won't, and that's okay too, because you've learned something more important than how to maintain relationships. You've learned how to maintain yourself. You've learned that you can survive without people, that you're enough on your own, that your worth isn't determined by who stays or who goes. And that's powerful, because now if you do let people in, it's not because you need them, it's because you want them. And there's a difference. Need makes you desperate, makes you accept less than you deserve, makes you compromise parts of yourself to keep people around. Want gives you choice, gives you power, gives you the freedom to walk away if it's not right. Here's what I want you to know. If you're someone who cut everyone off, you're not broken. You're not cold. You're not heartless. You're not the villain in everyone else's story. You're just someone who got tired of being the only one trying. Someone who realized that being alone is less painful than being unseen. Someone who chose peace over performance. And that's not selfish. That's survival. You gave everything you had to people who gave you nothing back. And when you finally stopped, they had the audacity to act like you were the problem. But you weren't. You aren't. The problem was that you were pouring from an empty cup into cups that were never empty to begin with. They just wanted more. And you finally said no. Let's talk about forgiveness. Not forgiving them. Forgiving yourself. For staying too long. For giving too much. For ignoring the red flags. For accepting the bare minimum and convincing yourself it was enough. For believing that if you just loved harder, tried more, cared deeper, people would finally see you. They didn't. And that's not your fault. You did everything right. You showed up, you cared, you tried. The problem wasn't your effort. It was that you were giving it to people who were never going to match it. So forgive yourself for not knowing that sooner. for hoping when you should have walked away, for staying when you should have left. You were doing the best you could with what you knew, and now you know better. Here's the truth about cutting everyone off. It's not about hating people. It's about loving yourself enough to stop accepting less than you deserve. It's not about building walls. It's about building boundaries. It's not about giving up on connection. It's about refusing to settle for the broken version of it that's been offered to you over and over again. Maybe people don't understand. Maybe they never will. But you're not doing this for them. You're doing this for you. For the version of you that's been drowning in relationships that only took. For the version of you that's been invisible in rooms full of people. For the version of you that's been screaming for help while everyone looked the other way. You're choosing yourself, finally. And that's not cold, that's courage. You cut everyone off. And maybe one day you'll open the door again, to the right people, on your terms. But for now, you're here, in the quiet, in the space you created by removing everything that was slowly destroying you. And it's not lonely anymore, it's peaceful. Because you're not waiting for people to show up. You're not hoping for change. You're not performing for acceptance. You're just being and healing and learning that you're enough, all on your own. You didn't cut everyone off because you're broken. You cut everyone off because you were breaking. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who would have let you shatter. You're not cold, you're clear. You're not closed off. You're protected, you're not giving up. You're finally choosing yourself. And that's everything.